After rewriting this video, I don't know how many times, I'm going to warn you, I'm getting meta this time around. This week you wanted to continue the popular series about updated classes and how they fit into Mystara. This setting has to update to continue if it's ever going to get a reboot or just a continuation. But at the same time, you don't want to turn it into another D&D setting that's just an aimless kitchen sink like the Forgotten Realms. So the trick is to try to upgrade the older parts of Mystara to 5th edition, but ignore the parts of 5th edition that don't belong. It's a balancing act that's not going to make everybody happy. But enough meta talk, let's talk about sorcery in Mystara. I'm Mr. Welch, and today's lesson is just because you can, doesn't mean you should. Sorcery in 5th edition, at least in the player's handbook, comes from bloodlines or unstable magic, which creates a problem in Mystara because the setting really doesn't do any of that. Magic in Mystara is so stable it's taught like a science. Chaos magic in Mystara doesn't exist, and adding it removes a large part of the magic system that makes Glantry such a memorable magocracy. The other aspect of the original 5th edition sorcery is dragon magic, which again is tied to the Forgotten Realms, and that doesn't translate into Mystara easily. Mystara doesn't have half-breed races anywhere near the scale of other settings. It's a quirk because of the Beckme system that spawned Mystara, but it also gave Mystara one of its memorable traits. So throw out all the 5th edition sorcery. We're just not dealing with that. We are building Mystara sorcerers up from scratch. To create a sorcery specific to Mystara, we need to come up with native forms of magic, something a creature is born with or somehow manages to manifest, rather than earned through learned study. If you follow the Mystara guide videos, you know the book has two different Mystaran sorcerers, the Volcani and the Disciple of the Radiance. Those had ties to previous Mystara magic, and worked into 5th edition almost seamlessly. Volcani are the most primitive form of arcane spellcaster in Mystara. They're also the most common sorcerer by far. Volcani don't understand the finer points of magic. They shape magical energies into the form of spells that people recognize. This explains why the Volcani have fewer spells. They find a shape of magic they find easy to create, and that becomes what is their chosen spell. While they don't have the range of spells that traditional wizards have, the way they create their spells means that they can create more powerful spells and spells that do more damage or create more of an area of effect than even what normal sorcerers would create. Volcani are best described as magical arcane batteries, not the 9-volt batteries you stick on your tongue for a weird sensation. I'm talking about the batteries that unloaded on France off the coast of Normandy on June 6th all those years ago. For all intents and purposes, Volcani in gameplay are nothing more than walking weapon platforms. Because of this brute force magic, they are normally found in humanoid and barbarian cultures, where book-learned wizards are almost unheard of. The spellcasters of Thar's legions are going to be, almost without exception, Volcani. The same is true for spellcasters in parts of the Northern Reaches, because spell books are hard to find, but there's going to be some random wild man who discovered how to turn the magical energies that only he can see into an explosion. The Northmen might fear old Skeld and his ability to summon fire without flint or tinder, but the second he turns a whole bunch of kobold raiders into just so many Roman candles, they are going to be a whole lot more forgiving of his eccentricities. With Glantry being the centerpiece of magic, and be honest, it is the best known for people who know just a little bit about Mystara, it would make sense that those magic-using pragmatists would somehow develop a form of sorcery. Add in the mysterious power source that is the Radiance, the magical radiation that both improves magic and also threatens its very existence. With a bit of artistic license, the Radiance can create sorcerers. The magic created by the Radiance creates multiple problems, mainly because of the geographical requirements of this energy source. Radiant sorcerers have to be near Glantry to gain most of their powers. It makes sense, as their power directly comes from the nucleus of the spheres directly under Glantry City. The sorcerers generate magical energy faster the closer they are to Glantry City, so you're not going to find many outside of Glantry, and even there, the further away from the capital you get, the fewer Radiant sorcerers you're going to find. And the catch with the Radiant sorcery is there's actually two different groups that have the sorcerers. With the Shadow Elves' close proximity to the Soul Stones, they are heavily exposed to the magic of the Radiant, so having some among their numbers develop Radiant sorcery makes sense. Unlike the Glantrian sorcerers, the Shadow Elves have no reason to hide their magic. To them, it's a mark of pride to be granted magical powers seemingly by the power of the Soul Stones. Of course, Shadow Elves have no clue to the actual true nature of the Soul Stones, at least the regular rank and file, so to them it's a religious miracle rather than for arcane reasons. However, the nature of the Radiance is still the same. It's still tied to the nucleus of the spheres under Glantry City, even when it's underground with the Shadow Elves. Fortunately for the Shadow Elves, they don't range far from the City of Stars, so that's not a problem for them. Those are the two Mystara-specific sorceries. You're going to find Volcani far more than Radiant sorcerers. Volcani can be anywhere. They're just primitive shamans that can shape magic into spells. But the Radiance is much more interesting as far as player options go because it's so narrow in scope. It's a class that is not only tied to a single region, but a single city in that region. Because of the nature of Glantry and the murderous intentions of the Brotherhood of the Rad, sorcerers have to disguise their actual magic as arcane wizardry or risk getting murdered or worse. If you're running a Glantrian campaign, especially with the School of Magic, they make for a fantastic class to play. Now I have to add the eternal caveat of all RPGs. Your game, your rules. My job is just to explain how the class works in Mystara as a setting and try to make a square peg fit into a round hole. If you want dragons and chaos magic in your game, it's up to you. The later 5th edition books have added several new subclasses of sorcery that you can add as you see fit. If you're writing a module or an adventure or a new source book for Threshold or the Vaults of Pandius, and you want to try to stick to canon as much as possible, you might want to leave them off. Now for the meta part, because that's all I can really talk about sorcery in Mystara. It's a new concept, and trying to apply that to an old setting makes for a difficult fit. I'll let you in on a little secret of game design. What you leave out is just as important as what you put in. You don't have to shoehorn in every single class and race from the core book into your setting. Some settings are catch-alls. You want everything possible in the setting to give it the kitchen sink feel. Planescape is an example of this done right. Other settings, what is missing is a major part of the setting. Dark Sun killed off half of the playable races long before the players rolled up their characters. Take Drow, for example. Of the 7 major settings that aren't catch-alls, Drow are in the Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk, and Eberron. They don't exist in Birthright, Mystara, Dark Sun, or Dragonlance. Adding them into those 4 settings cheapens the feel of the setting because it makes it feel less unique. Mystara has Shadow Elves, which removes the need for the Drow. Different motivations, history, and racial abilities, yet they still occupy the role of the unknown elves that are common in a lot of fantasy settings. Drow would look just as much out of place in Mystara as taking Belkade's elves out of Glantry and dropping them square into the middle of Dark Sun or Greyhawk. You can build your settings by cherry picking. Wizards has multiple settings that do exactly this in Magic the Gathering. There's no humans in Lorwyn. There's nothing but humans in Innistrad. It doesn't make either of those settings less interesting. It gives them a distinct feel that separates them from the other fantasy settings in Magic the Gathering. You can create some of the best fantasy movies with selective additions and subtractions. If you allow nothing but elves, Aranea, Nagpa, and halflings, you get Dark Crystal. If you only allow humans, dwarves, tieflings, and goblins, that gets you Legend. Breaking a mold means you can create something never attempted before. The player's handbook lists half of the races presented as optional. There's no reason why you can't apply that to classes. If you're playing in a setting that's set, say, in the Renaissance, there's not a lot of need for barbarians. If you're playing pre-War of the Lance Dragonlance, there's no clerics at all, and that's a major plot point. So be unique in your settings and say no. That's going to wrap up me monologuing. Next week I'm adding the new topic of Mystara and monsters in other settings, or me talking about when Wizards or TSR grabbed what was a Mystara-only monster and crammed it into another setting, often without mentioning where it came from, or worse, completely retconning the background of the monster. Of course, there's our other previous entries that are all viable, and you can choose from those. But until next week, remember, strategic tactical nuclear carpet bombing is a valid tactic.